Hello, everyone. We're so happy to have you here with us today. Welcome to our St. Paul Learn with the League. I'm Heidi Klumpkin, League Board Member. I'm moderating tonight's presentation, Don't Judge, Lift Up. Many thanks to the Roseville and White Bear Lake area leagues for their support and for our programs. Please check out their websites for more information about what they're doing too. Also, thank you to the St. Paul Neighborhood Network and some suburban community channels for taping and broadcasting our presentations. Our program is being recorded on Zoom, so feel free to type in questions during the presentation and the Q&A, and we'll address those at the end of the talk. In a couple of days, you can check out our YouTube channel for League of Women Voters St. Paul, and you can view this and other previous programs. Next slide, please. For a few years, League of Women Voters St. Paul has been interested in continued education about the various branches of government, specifically the judiciary. Past events and our book clubs often study topics and events related to the judicial branch. In fact, earlier we just realized one of our panelists has been part of a program with us in 2019, so welcome back. We were fascinated when we read the article in the Star Tribune in December about the women's community group that meets in St. Paul on Wednesdays to support each other through and outside of the judicial process. Next slide, please. So the judicial system, like other parts of local, state, and national government, can seem confusing and overwhelming to those who don't work within it every day. In learning about the women's community group, we were excited to see the continuing education of the judicial system and other systems. In preparing for this program today, I spent some time on the Minnesota Judicial Branch website. There are some really great resources for someone who needs a refresher from their high school government class, someone who is going to start working through the judicial process for different reasons, or educators. In fact, the most helpful tab I saw was Teachers and Students tab, which is, if you see on the website, this is a screenshot of the website right under File a Case. There's Teachers and Students tab. And this tab is a helpful starter guides and lesson plans. Lots of introductions to the various levels of court and things like that. Next slide, please. There was an introduction guide with this page, How a Case Gets to the Minnesota Supreme Court. And I wanted to highlight this a little bit because this outlines the various courts in Minnesota. So there's the trial court, the Minnesota Court of Appeals, which just honored their 40th anniversary of the first judges being appointed, and then the Minnesota Supreme Court. There's also a tax court and workers' compensation court of appeals. Each has a mission and goals in their own divisions. I'd recommend taking some time to read through some of these documents and learn about our court system. It's easily accessible, and I had a lot of fun, so I'm going to spend more time there as well. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Assistant Chief Judge in Minnesota's Second Judicial Court, which is in Ramsey County, Judge Sarah Grewing was appointed in 2015. Judge Grewing received a BM from the University of Minnesota and a JD from William Mitchell College of Law, which I believe is now Mitchell-Hamlin. Prior to being appointed, Judge Grewing also worked for the city of St. Paul, worked for U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, and as an attorney. So welcome, Judge Grewing. Next slide, please. We also have with us tonight Judge Maria Mitchell, appointed to the Second Judicial District in 2022. Judge Mitchell received a BA from Fisk University and a JD at the University of Minnesota. Prior to appointment, Judge Mitchell also worked as Assistant Ramsey County Attorney for Hennepin County and as a law clerk and for another county. I can't remember which one though, and I didn't put it in my notes, I'm sorry. And then next slide, please. We also have with us Judge Nicole Starr. Judge Nicole J. Starr was appointed to the Second Judicial District in 2015. Judge Starr received a BA at the University of Minnesota and a JD from the Minnesota Law School. Prior to appointment, Judge Starr worked as a public defender in Ramsey County, a law clerk, and with law firms. So thank you so much for being here. I believe I forgot to welcome Judge Mitchell as well. So Judge Mitchell and Judge Starr, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. If you wanted to come up on screen and join us. Thank you. So we do have a series of questions for our panelists tonight. And then as attendees, if you wanted to put questions in the chat, we will ask those later on. Sorry, I've got papers that are making noise now. I believe we wanted to start with talking about your program. And our first question is for Judge Starr. At the base of this program, the Women's Community Group, it's building community and a safe space. Can you talk a bit about why this is important to folks to navigate the judicial process?
Yes. So thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for having us here today. What a delight. So the women's group that Judge Mitchell and Judge Gruring and I started and have continued to run in the community is really based on the principle from a quote from Maya Angelou. And her quote is, I've learned that people will forget what you've said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so part of this group is really based on this idea of bringing humanity, both understanding people's humanity who show up in and are justice involved, and then also trying to demonstrate that judges are people too. We are part of your community, and really trying to create that community of people who may not always get to meet each other. And so the group is based on a couple of ideas. We meet every Wednesday at Wilder Foundation. And we initially started prior to the pandemic at the Ramsey County Workhouse. And we would meet with women who were incarcerated in the jail. So they had been sentenced to jail, and they would come and meet with Judge Gruring and myself, and we would just talk. We just sit down in a circle with women who had committed offenses and just ask them, like, what are you thinking? How are you feeling? What kind of questions do you have for us? Right? What do you wish judges knew? Right? So it started off by just coming and really being curious and inquisitive and asking people to talk to us. And one of the women in the group said, well, do you and Judge Gruring ever hang out on the outs? And I didn't know what that meant, on the outs. And what it means is outside of jail. And actually, we didn't. It was a valid question, and she and other women in the group said, but we'd like to see this in the community. It's one thing while we're incarcerated, we can make a lot of promises. But what we really need is help in the community. A lot of women, and this is not a reason to incarcerate people by any means, but it's something to sort of keep in mind. Women would tell us sometimes this is a break from the incredible stress, the trauma, the pressures, the daily grind of being out in the community. So our group, again, meets every Wednesday, and it's based on, one, the principle of really kind of making sure that people feel heard, and knowing that we're engaged in people's trying to rebuild a confidence in the legal system so that women know that judges care. The second piece is that we believe building community that community is the opposite of addiction. That rather than saying that sobriety is the opposite, community is the opposite. And that if we can create community, that we can help women create and support each other when they're living with and trying to work through substance use disorders, from alcoholism to using street drugs, that this is a space where people can talk about that. And just last week, we had a woman say, I don't know if I should say this, but I smelled fentanyl on the train and I had cravings. And in our small groups, we said, yes, this is exactly what we want you to be able to say. And we want to talk about that because we believe that if you have people around you supporting you, that you can work through this and that we can help you get the right resources. And then the final piece of this is something Judge Mitchell and I were just at another community event, that we also believe that culture is prevention, that creating a culture and celebrating each other's culture is part of prevention and really part of helping people work through those hard things. So our group works on substance use disorders and also trauma. And trauma can come in a lot of different forms, especially in the justice system. specifically based, gender-based trauma a lot of our women have seen. Um, and so we come at this with an idea that everyone brings their own culture, and that talking about, celebrating, and engaging with each other is also a prevention both of continued emotional trauma, but also again for substance use.
And I just like to, well, I would like to credit Andi Young with the culture is prevent. What was the quote?
Culture is prevention.
Yeah, culture is prevention. So that was part of being in community when they invite the judges every year to come and have a meal with them and learn about the work they're doing. And they were the ones that had coined that phrase. And what they're doing is a little bit of like what we're doing with our group. And in fact, um, we do incorporate some Indigenous practices into our group. We have a probation officer, Melissa Perez, who did a presentation on sweetgrass and also sage, um, and what are the healing properties of that. We have quite a few Indigenous women. As you know, Indigenous women and Black women are the most disproportionately impacted by the justice system, and we do have a very diverse group.
Thank you so much. I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass right now, so I love that connection. Thank you. We have another question too, and I'm going to ask that earlier when we were first meeting too, we talked a little bit about your backgrounds and we did talk about that in the introduction, but if while answering this question, you wanted to talk a little bit too about how you became a judge and how that works, that is also great. But I wanted to focus on the program first, but how did your backgrounds as public defenders, city attorneys, and the other roles mentioned, or other roles that you've done? I know many of you work in community and other spaces too, but how has that helped with this program and how has that helped it grow?
So that was my question, and so I just left my mic unmuted. And so, particularly, my background is I worked as a legal aid attorney in New York, and there I did some family law. I'm from Minnesota originally, but and legal aid there is pretty much like the public defender here. They don't have a statewide public defender system, and so they would represent indigent clients. I did in misdemeanor criminal um, arraignments, and then mainly in family court with orders of protection, uh, representing both the alleged perpetrator and the alleged victim in those cases, child support and child, they call it abuse and neglect. We call it child in need of protection or services. So that is a very important background for working with women in this scenario. I also worked as a county attorney in child protection here in Ramsey County. And understanding, as part of that work, you do undergo quite a few trainings to understand what the people who are coming before the court deal with on a daily basis and how the laws impact individuals. And in the city attorney's office, Judge Gruing was very involved in domestic violence, blueprint for safety, and making sure that now that the court is implementing those practices. And Judge Starr was very involved in, as a public defender, in understanding how different sentencings impact clients and individuals who are coming through the justice system and having those one-on-one conversations. I think the other thing that is really helpful is that by being a public defender, a city attorney, or a county attorney within the justice system, you are aware of what all the resources are available to people. As a both as a public defender and a child protection and juvenile prosecutor, I would often have to understand where children and parents were going for services so that I would be aware of what types of services they were getting once they left court. And kind of double checking to make sure that their appropriate services are being able to make suggestions and brainstorm with other professionals such as probation officers and social workers. So that's been really useful because all three of us have firm understanding of what services are available in the community. And along with our probation cohort, Gail Merkel, I hope I said it right, and Diana Vang, who works for housing in Ramsey County. We can all come up with solutions for people when they're in crisis. So, for example, one of the women said, "I'm going to be evicted," and so at that time, Judge Starr was able to send an email saying, um, "Did you reach out to Diana Vang because she understands the housing concept?" And in fact, they were able to prevent that eviction because of those resources and connections. So being connected to the community and understanding what the services are that are available, but also having worked with hundreds of people, hundreds of people over the years. I'm sorry, my dog had to chime in. Hundreds of people over the years, um, just being able to meet people where they're at and not being shocked by frankly anything, um, because we've seen it all. As Judge Starr mentioned, the craving for fentanyl, we also had an instance where a woman came in having seen an overdose on the train, and the people were asked, the women present that day were asking for more information. So through our three connections with the county and um, addiction services, we were able to get somebody to come in and provide Narcan as well as describe how do you respond to in an emergency with an addiction, because that's a reality in their lives that they see more regularly than I do. And but we're aware of that because of the people that we meet and the conversations that we have on a daily basis. And then the last thing I'll say is we also understand on a very acute level how different systems work. So sometimes when people get stuck, our backgrounds help us kind of help them process that. And because we have more of a big picture view, we also have Mutiet, who's a county attorney, and Emma Koski, who's a public defender, who have been with us at every step of the way, who can offer some legal advice, not as a lawyer, but as pointing in the right direction. And so it's very helpful for us in that way too, to use those skills. So I think our combined knowledge of working with people and our combined knowledge of the system are very important in being a resource.
Thank you so much. I feel like also building those relationships, then people can trust that you are sharing the information that's needed, and things like that. I also thank you for the reminder that our court systems, we can use different language in different states, just like our voting laws are different in different states too. So when you go to a new location, sometimes you have to learn new processes and new systems and new languages with how people call certain programs and events. So thank you for that reminder. I have another question. Can you talk a little bit about the funding and how that supports the food and the transportation and childcare? I've worked in lots of programs where I know how essential all three of those things are, so I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Heidi. And just briefly about my background, I actually have an undergraduate degree in music, so didn't come to the law through a traditional path. Decided to go to law school kind of on a whim, and then had the good fortune of interning in Senator Wellstone's office, largely for Sheila Wellstone, during the first reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. And so we were doing shelter tours and field hearings and those sorts of things. So that really kind of encouraged my interest in public service and in public law. I then started working while I was in law school for now Senator Klobuchar while she was the Hennepin County attorney, was a prosecutor in her office for a year, briefly went into private practice, and then became the political director on her campaign. And then I helped her transition into office when she was elected in 2006. I've had the good fortune of working in this beautiful building for the last 17 years. I was chief of staff to Mayor Chris Coleman, and then was the St. Paul City attorney just prior to coming on the bench. So that's just a quick review of how I came to this job that I'm deeply grateful for every day. We are in a bit of a state of transition on our funding and welcome the opportunity to brainstorm solutions. We're limited as judges. We cannot fundraise. Our ethical duties prevent us from, asking for money. We've been really fortunate to have the support of Ramsey County through this process. And the bulk of our funding kind of came through some pandemic funds that they had, and now is transitioning into some funds around racial equity. But yes, part of the challenge when Judge Starr and I had that conversation, and this woman who said, can we do this on the outs? We know that when you serve women, the big obstacles are childcare and food. Like, we have to make this easy for you to come. And so we kept getting stuck on that, and location a little bit. Like, how do we do this in the outs when we don't have a good idea for location? So the fact that the YMCA came to the table and now we're at the Wilder Foundation, like, that space is just extraordinary, and they've been wonderful hosts for us. The geography there is just so great that it's easily accessible, and public transportation at the Wilder Foundation is outstanding, and they've been wonderful to share that space with us. Then Volunteers in Corrections, which is a board through Ramsey County, assists us with some of the gift card funding. We really found that compensating people for attendance, obviously encourages attendance. We often find that they are sort of the subject matter experts on a lot of systems things. And so we get a lot of, it's almost like a focus group. We get a lot of good feedback about how the justice system could serve people better. And so they should be compensated for that. I mean, they're consultants essentially on what we're doing. And then it really makes a tangible difference. That $25 means if you have to take an Uber, if you have to take Lyft, if you have to, if this can sort of get you through the next 3 days of the week, is really helpful. So Ramsey County comes to the table with us. Volunteers in Corrections, the Wilder Foundation donates their space in kind. We would hope for more of a sustainable solution, because we're sort of dependent on different grant funds and kind of finding funds as it goes. And so we're kind of brainstorming about how to do that, so that we can maintain that community that we've worked so hard to build, and that it isn't sort of subject to the natural kind of ebb and flow of government funds.
Well, also, you might want to mention the childcare portion and how that gets done.
Well, I mean, that is often one of us. And to call
Judge
it
Deering's
childcare,
one of the main children whisperers,
I'm,
so that's why I pointed it out.
I like to have a toddler on each hip and kind of wander around. But I mean, to call it childcare is kind of a strong word, because we really are just assisting with watching your kids so you can have group. It's not like people drop off their kids and then leave the building or something like that. But we've been able, I mean, again, in so many aspects of this, we are getting way more than we give in terms of our involvement with this group. And we've really been able to develop great relationships with these kids. We had a young man whose mom used to come, and then unfortunately she is in Shakopee now. So his grandma regularly attends group and is sort of a co-facilitator. And she, and the kiddo said to us once, he sort of sighed because I was asking him about homework. And I said, do you have homework this week? What's going on? And how's school going? And he said, I just feel like I have 3 extra aunties with you judges. My job here is done. So if he has 3 extra aunties who are judges who are asking him if he's got his homework done, then I'll take a victory lap on that.
And
Well,
that's kind of how community works, in terms of like, you know, it's not like she said, it's not childcare in the sense of like New Horizons or something like that, but it is like your auntie is watching the child while you fold the laundry kind of thing.
mhm.
And it is and that is beautiful to see. And sometimes the kids just want to go back to mom, and that's fine. They're only a room away.
Mhm.
And I think Judge Starr sees that too in treatment courts. It's like building that community, and then people start to trust each other and build relationships.
This all sounds so wonderful. Thank you so much. I did want to ask before we move on to the next question, if Judge Mitchell or Judge Starr, if either of you wanted to share a little bit about how you came to be a judge.
I'll go and then I'll let you go last, Judge Mitchell. Um, so I went to the University of Minnesota as an undergrad. I had a double major in women's studies, which is now called gender studies. And maybe not even, I don't even know anymore, but it was gender studies for a hot moment, and sub-Saharan African history. And so after I got done with that, I was ready to change the world, and I decided to go to law school, which, as I learned, may not have been exactly the most radical space on earth. Law school, I would say for a lot of folks, is a place where people who have liberal arts degrees learn to like really button that down. So I don't know how Judge Gruring made it through with a music major, but um, and then I became a public defender. And it is I love being a judge. It is an honor and a privilege. And, but my first love is public defense. And when I was a public defender, I had clients who we would walk into the courtroom. I would have, you're like if you've ever met public defenders, you're kind of like an edgy social studies teacher. You're teaching all of 10th, 11th, and 12th grade social studies in about 3 minutes to somebody, and then walking into court where they may not walk out with you. And so I found more and more that I was walking into court with people and walking out, and they were saying to me, "I don't know what just happened. Like I have no idea what just happened." Um, and I realized and thought we can do better. I became a judge because the people who I cared about the most in my one true love, um, public defense, and don't tell my wife because she's really my one true love, but my second one true love, um, the the court systems were unintelligible to folks who were walking in and out of them, and dangerous because lots of folks weren't walking out of the court. They were walking in the front door and being locked up. And at the time, and this is still something we're working on a lot, substance use disorders, people who were struggling with core public health issues. And I would include at this point, as a judge, mental health, poverty, racism. Like these are core public health issues. And the folks who are coming into court were walking out with those needs unmet or being punished because of the symptoms of some of those needs. And so I applied to be a judge, and Judge Gruring and I were actually appointed on the exact same day by Governor Dayton. It has, like I said, it has been an honor. It is a true delight to have been to grow in this space with Judge Gruring and Judge Mitchell, and it's just that's how I ended up becoming a judge.
Well, thank you so much for that. As a former social studies teacher, I hear you. It's hard to remember all of that thing and what's going on with it. I do appreciate that there was a juvenile justice standard in the standards for a while to make sure students kind of tried to understand, and we're trying to get them familiar with the system in case they're in it for any reason or have relatives in it. So thank you. Judge Mitchell, would you like to share?
So I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer in 6th grade. And so I'm one of those oddities where that I latched onto that early. But I think one of the things that um, that that motivated me was I had to do a book report about schools. And so I interviewed my mom, who grew up in St. Paul, Rondo neighborhood, and I interviewed my dad, who grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. And during that interview, I learned that my mom um, was able to go to Central High School, and she was pretty active in the NAACP here. But my dad went to Sterling High School in Greenville, which was still segregated, and in fact remained segregated after Brown versus Board of Education. So as part of that, I began to kind of look into what Brown versus Board of Education. So at that age, you don't really have the bandwidth to really understand everything, but you do understand that something's not fair and something doesn't appear to be right. So with that in mind, that started to propel my career towards um, wanting to be a lawyer. And so I did all the necessary things like join the speech team, join the debate team, thinking that that would be helpful. And then I went off to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a historically Black college and university. And in fact, Constant Baker Motley, one of the lawyers on Brown v. Board of Education, attended it for a while, as well as John Lewis and Diane Nash. And so those were some of my heroes. And so my goal was to go and be a lawyer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But of course, that changed over time. And I am a first generation lawyer. And I think that Judge Starr and Judge Gruing are as well. So you don't always know um, all of the things that are necessary to get to a particular path. And so I ended up practicing law in ways that I thought were trying to give people dignity and enforce their rights, and also taking into account their humanity in positions that I've held as a county attorney or a public defender. And I decided at some point that representation matters, and a part of working with the bar associations is an attempt to get more diversity on the bench, including I work with the Infinity Project, which is geared at getting more women on the Eighth Circuit bench as well as on the Minnesota bench. And I worked with a lot of people, prepping them to get ready to become a judge. And I also put my hat in because I thought, well, if there aren't any qualified candidates, I'll put my name in and I will be the qualified candidate if you're looking for somebody who is a diverse candidate. And that's how I started my journey. But to Judge Starr's point, um, one of the best things about what I'm doing now is I'm able to kind of I'm able to do things that I didn't see when I was a lawyer. So it makes me very happy and proud to be able to to humanize people in a way that I thought didn't always happen, and treat, lawyers with respect too. I mean, it really matters that the lawyers that come in and appear before you and are representing clients are treated with respect in a way that their client knows that their representation is important, and that the lawyer is competent. And by giving public defenders that type of respect, as well as county attorneys showing their humanity too, because it's not always just a situation where with David and Goliath, a lot of times it's problem solving. And how do we make, because I'm in criminal court, how do we make the public safe, but also attempt to do things that will keep a person from recommitting the offense? And so that is my path to the bench.
Thank you so much. And as I think we've kind of noted, but I want to point out that the three of you represent the three different areas of court at the trial court level. So you have the representation there, not only your background experience, but your experience in the courts now as well. So thank you for that. I have another question, and I'm going to make it a two-parter. I originally sent it to you and it was just one, but I'm going to add a little part to it. So, how do you decide the educational components of the evenings? And then with that, could you walk us through an agenda of the night, kind of when people arrive and what kind of the structure of the evening works? As much as you can share. I'm sure it's different every time a little bit.
I'll let Judge Starr, Judge Gruing chime in, but that was since I just did a lot of talking. But that is the question that I was prepared to answer.
Okay.
Particularly, we start with a check-in, and it could be designed by either Judge Starr or Judge Gruing or myself. And sometimes the lawyers who are there will design the check-in. And at that time, it's the time that women get to say, hey, this is what's on my mind. And there's also sort of an icebreaker component. Like one time we said, Judge Starr came up, what's the worst job you've ever had? And that's a fun one because people talk about working at fast food or something spilling all over them. And all of the calamity that ensues as a teenager working a first job. But then you say, how was your day? And that is a big question because sometimes the day is just good and sometimes it brings out a story that needs to be problem solved. And at times the women work together to try to troubleshoot and work on the problem that the other person has. And they oftentimes are very, very good at it. And they not only problem solve, but they also uplift and pour into that person in a way that makes them want to keep moving for the week. And that does that for us too. I mean, we suck up a lot of the the support that happens there. So not only are we giving support, but we also get refueled by doing that. And that could take the whole night sometimes. And we're okay. We're flexible. We're like, hey, if that's the issue, that's what we're going to do. So then the other thing is we have a seeking safety curriculum, which is to address trauma, addiction, and mental health. And not all of our participants have all of them, but everyone has one of them. So they prompt you to think about different ways to look at managing trauma, coping skills, also building support networks so that people don't feel so isolated and alone. And they also work at improving your own self-image as well, because a lot of women are very hard on themselves, including probably all of us on this call. And so understanding what are some of the things that trigger us to be negative and practicing being positive is an important thing. Some women say that the group is a lot like their cog skills class, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy, but a little bit different. So also we pour in like our experiences that we have from treatment courts, I did a lot of restorative justice as part of the county attorney's office. I use that as well. And so that's how the programming comes about. But we also invite women to present themselves if they want to. It's very participant driven. So if they have an interest, so one time the women expressed an interest about self-defense. So Judge Starr brought in the police chief of, I think it is Mendota Heights, and she taught self-defense, which was just fun. And they also had an interest in heart health. So Judge Gruing brought in her sister, who's a nurse, and she educated about heart and CPR. And you guys can chime in however you wish.
So maybe just to add a little more contour to this. So I think I've seen some questions about, well, who's our target audience? We made a decision early on that we didn't want people, we wanted folks who were justice involved or justice adjacent. And we wanted people to not be court ordered into our program, but come voluntarily. And so we started off in a room at, sometimes there would be, 4 of us and like 2 participants. And it started off a little rough. And I remember those days where I was like, this isn't gonna work. And then we started, women started to do kind of probably the best review we've ever had. They'd bring their moms. We had 2 different people bring their mother, 3 different people bring their moms. Sometimes the moms would come even when the daughters didn't, like Judge Gruing talked about. We've had people bring their daughters and their daughters' kids. We had one woman recruited her cousin, and her cousin was, at the time we saw her, and it was only once. She was 8 months pregnant and hadn't been to prenatal care. And we taught and offered resources, right? Without judgment, without shame, just can we offer you some ideas? We had one woman who recruited somebody at the laundromat. And so we put out a flyer, and certainly justice involved people from their probation officers might hear about us, sober houses, women who are transitioning from Shakopee, which is the women's prison in Minnesota, back into the community. We have folks of, who are really young to people who are our grandmas. I had one woman who came to the group who I had sentenced to prison for murder. And she, after she came out of prison, and I've been a judge for, I don't know, are we going on 10 years? So it was early in my career, and she came out of prison and came to group. And so women come to us sort of through a lot of different channels, and we welcome anybody who's willing to come and be part of our community. And one of the things I would just sort of add to the Seeking Safety curriculum is the reason we chose it is that, so I work at, like Judge Mitchell, we were in treatment courts, and it's recommended, it's a recommended text for people who have substance use disorders. And you don't have to be a professional therapist to use the curriculum. So Judge Gruing and I were both trained on the curriculum, and the training is enough to sort of move forward. So we don't provide therapy. We aren't, we try to really stay in our lane, because, trauma is tricky, and there's a lot that we can't do. We're not substance use counselors and we're not social workers. So we do try to kind of honor our limitations. So that curriculum was part of, specifically chosen because anyone who gets trained in it and stays faithful to it is able to use that curriculum.
Well, thank you so much for that. You kind of answered my next question of how do folks hear about the evenings, but we did have a question come in. I'm wondering if you could address, is participation anonymous, or how do you, and it's building community, so obviously people know each other, but I mean, we're not supposed to, we don't have to know everybody's names, but how do you handle that kind of safe conversations or set those expectations for conversations and anonymity when appropriate?
Well, I think because I'll take it. um, I think because it is such a supportive community, the women who come, and the interesting thing, we were talking the other day, and we're like with some of the women, and we were all commenting. We've all been in women's groups before, and we're like, this group, we don't have any cliques. We don't have any of the things that happen sometimes when you get together with people, and they're and the women understand that everyone is walking sort of the same journey, even though they're not at the same milestone at the same time. Like some of the older women have the wisdom, and some of the younger women have resources or can do things physically that the older women can't do. And but they all there isn't a policy, but everyone understands when they come what this is. And of course, we're not going to publish the names or anything like that, but when people come, they're there to be open. They're there to share what they have and learn what they can. And so it's not a place where you go and like AA and you say, "Yep, I'm sober and I used or I didn't use." It's more of you get to say what you want. It's That's kind of the restorative portion of it is that if you want to pass that day, you pass. You don't have to share. And if you want to break it down that day and share it all, you can share it all. And because everyone has seen so much in their lives, including us, um, we there is an understanding, as Judge Starr said, about no judgment and no shaming. And there is an understanding that everyone who comes to the group is coming to heal and be a healer themselves. One of the activities we had was with a woman who does sound bowls, and she would say, greet us and say, "Hello, healers. Hello, beautiful healers." And I think that really sums up what happens is there's a portion of it where they are healing themselves through positive activity and support. And they are just fine when people come and join the group and want to be a part of it because it's their choice where the conversation goes.
Thank you. I feel like we could probably talk for about 3 more hours, but I'd like to have some of our audience questions answered if possible. We can get through a few of them. One thing as legal women voters, we are always paying attention to is changes in voting laws. And with Restore the Vote last year, we're very excited. We're actually doing a voter registration event this weekend with some folks who are on reentry. So I'm very excited. And we were at an expungement event a couple weeks ago as well. Most of those people were already registered to vote. It was just the people who are formerly felons, but it was still good. But can you talk a little bit about how some of the changes in laws, especially around marijuana consumption and production, has changed, and has that impacted anybody in your group, and like in the conversations and things, and some of the work that's being done?
Star, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One thing is we have at all of our groups a prosecutor and a defense attorney. So we're very clear with folks. We can't give them legal advice, and we like people to know when the laws have changed. And so, for example, we have been actively telling people you should register to vote. You don't even have to vote, but we want you to be engaged. The laws around marijuana have changed. We want you to talk to the defense attorney. We can't give you advice about that. I mean, and so we do try to really acknowledge the world around us and kind of what's happening. And I mean, I think for our space, what is a bit different than sort of traditional court, because it isn't court, is we are much more of a harm reduction space. And so we know that people define sober maybe differently than we would as judges, right? Sober in court means you're fully abstaining from all mood altering substances, and that includes legal substances like marijuana and alcohol. And in our space, we're much more interested in what kind of safe choices are you making today? And harm reduction for a lot of folks is the safest choice. How, like, just like Judge Mitchell said, we know people are still struggling with opioid use disorder. So let's talk about Narcan, and let's talk about fentanyl strips. Let's talk about how do you keep yourself safe. you know, when you're in hard situations. And so, yes, as the laws have changed, part of what we do as judges is really, and it's nice to have three of us kind of make eye contact and go like, oh, you know, don't cross this line. I know the lawyer in you really wants to do this, and help. You know, that's why it's wonderful to have other community members in the room and say, hey, I want you to talk to Emma, our defense attorney. I want you to talk to Mutiat, our prosecutor, just so you can have some other ideas about this. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's kind of the process we use.
I'll also say that it's interesting as the laws change, the women know already. Our women are that we're in community with, they are on the ball. And it's interesting because, for example, the new change in the law about aiding and abetting, um, they knew a couple cases. They knew who was being impacted. That some of them they knew, and it's very interesting that um, how how much they keep up on these things. They may not have the nuances, which is where the attorneys help out, but they know what's happening and they're watching, and they would be excellent advocates. And it's just about harnessing the advocacy for themselves, because women don't always put themselves first, which is a real problem for probably most of the people in this call. And also understanding that they do have the power and the voice to do those things, like the confidence to do that. So we I mean, I've been very impressed with the level of understanding of how the laws affect them, and in a sober state, they're able to reflect about how it impacted their lives and what changes are being made and what they can share with other women.
Thank you. I think I have time for two more questions, but first I also want to point out Judge Starr, Diane Hellickson, who is our former newsletter editor, sends you warm greetings. You married her and her husband 5 years ago, so thank you for that. And I think I was looking at the list of Ramsey County judges who can do marriages, and I think all three of you are on that list, right? If anybody's looking. So thank you. But one person did ask a little bit about thinking about being professional women. How do you find the time and the bandwidth to go this extra step? I know we've talked a lot about how you really believe in it, but were there other barriers that you needed to work with, or do you always also make sure you take time for yourselves when needed? How do you go the extra step?
I think that's a good one for Judge Gruing.
I think that's the profound benefit of the three of us doing it as a team, first of all. So, and we know the three of us are very close. We know if you're in a big trial, if you have a lot going on at home, like we will give each other permission to just sort of sit this Wednesday out. Judge Starr, I'm in a trial. Judge Starr came to me and said, just, we got this. You don't have to come tonight. And I think that that's a way we can really lift each other up. But again, I think we also find it really affirming, and it's an opportunity, a unique opportunity that a lot of judges don't have, to see the positive parts about being in community. Sometimes we can have days where we make a series of difficult decisions. And so to see women and families doing well kind of helps us reset a little bit too.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, my last question for the evening is, how can League of Women Voters St. Paul members help support this work and the people and other people navigating the judicial system? Kind of what can we take away from this presentation and go and do?
I think that one was mine too, but maybe all three of us can answer that. You addressed it a little bit, Heidi. We're so excited to vote, and we have a lot of women for whom this is their first election, certainly their first presidential election. They're off paper, they're out of custody. Like, this is really an exciting moment, and so and we're a little bit, number one, it's really important for us to stay in our lane. Obviously, Judge Mitchell is on the ballot, and so we want to make sure that that we're sort of, not putting people in awkward positions and abiding by all the ethics rules that we have as well. But so we would love any insights you have, any speakers, any, suggestions for presentations that would be up for joining us at the Wilder Foundation. I mean, we're always looking for subject matter experts in a lot of different places, particularly around employment. If you have members who can do job coaching and resume coaching and, getting everybody ready clothing wise, and, those sorts of things are always appreciated and valued. Access to resources like therapy and mental health assistance. And, we really try to tap in, particularly to the women in our community who want to help lift these women up just like we do. I said my sister came because there were questions about heart health. We've had a speaker come in about STIs and how to prevent STIs. We often get questions about menopause. I haven't quite cracked that yet, but I'd love to find a public health person or somebody who can talk about that. So we welcome expertise, and would love to have your members help us brainstorm about how we can better serve these women in some of those areas.
We also like to do fun things that are kind of like girly too. Like I had a friend who she's a Mary Kay director, and she came in and she gave all of the women skincare products and taught them how to use it and gave tips about how to keep. I mean, part of that is keeping healthy, but it's also about like people who maybe just have a bar of soap being able to do like a full skincare regime and understand like how moisturizing and all those different things impact you. The other thing we had, which is not so fluffy but would be fun, and we haven't quite worked it out yet, is doing bras. That can make a huge difference in how people perceive you, because of the way that it fits and how your clothing fits, and it can also impact your back. But it's hard to get a good fitting and the proper bra. So, like being able to give the bra um, could be a really empowering thing. Um, and understanding how undergarments work for you to on an employment situation. We've all seen someone where like, oh, I wish, sister, let me help you out because um, you're brilliant, and we just want you to present like you're brilliant. And so, things like that are something we do too. It's not all like super hard trauma work, but it is, you know, those kinds of things are a craft that is not very difficult to do. We did painting once. Um, Things like that can be worked in as well.
I would just also put out for folks, we are always looking for people to help us be with children. And that's a tough one because again, the parents are there. We there's a lot of kind of concerns obviously around being safe with children and who can be with children. And so, if you have connections to folks who do professional are professionals going to school for child development, or we have our women have a lot of hard things that have happened to them, and so have their kids. And I mean, I think kind of to not to put too fine of a point on it, is for our women and for their children, that feeling of being really disempowered and that feeling of really being kind of lost. The league offers one of the most powerful examples that I could think of for our women, which is every woman at the ballot box, every single person is exactly equal. It is one of the very few moments in the United States where the very rich and powerful and the most dispossessed, right, of any power are exactly the same. And I think that as a former social studies teacher, Heidi, you probably know this, like sometimes our folks have lived in systems where their voices haven't been heard, where their lives have been discounted, where their stories have been either overly made so unique and so fantastic that they are kind of bigger than the person, or they've been fully ignored. And so, if if the league is interested in bringing that powerful message to our women, and really thinking about, for women who don't have transportation, who've never voted, who are really unlikely because of those barriers to go vote, even if we ask them to. I think that's, if we're sort of going to your core message, we have a lot of women, like Judge Goering said, who, if they could even find their way to the ballot, right, have maybe never even filled one out, or have some issues with literacy. And so I really, if you have those kinds of, we would call them peer recovery specialists, peer specialists. I think there's a lot that could be done. We have last week, I think we had 30 women, and this is a rotating list of people. We usually have about maybe 10 people who are the same every week, and we just keep growing and rotating. So there's a lot of place for collaboration.
Someone asked where the Wilder building is. It's on University and Lexington and St. Paul. So one of the things that we started out at the YMCA, and we were no longer they were no longer able to accommodate our group. And there is a men's group that also meets there, but they meet every other Wednesday. And so it's on the transportation hub. Like, people can take the light rail, they can take the bus there. So that's why we chose that location. And it's also a beautiful location. They do a lot of different presentations there.
And it's right next to the Aldi, so you can go grocery shopping before or after if you need to, which I've done before.
I was gonna say, and we have.
Or by the Popeyes if you need some chicken. Well, thank you both. Thank you all so much. I don't know why I said both. I'm sorry. I thank you all so much. Thank you to Judge Goering and Judge Mitchell and Judge Starr. We really appreciate your time and your expertise, and for sharing these stories tonight. We are so grateful for the work you're doing to build community, and the work that all your members are doing to build community as well. Thank you so much. I do want to point out before we sign off that, as we've heard, 2024 is a pretty big election year. So keep an eye out for some election information. Our primary is August 13th. But don't forget, we also have National Voter Registration Day on September 17th, which is also Constitution Day. So big combination there, and I'm pretty excited about that. And then, of course, November 5th is the general election, and we'll have information coming out about that as the season continues. Our next event is May 21st, and we will be talking about the new cannabis laws in Minnesota. So that did come up a little bit tonight, and that is what our program will be about. And so we are very excited to have you here, kind of leading into that. So we appreciate all of you for joining us tonight. The League is fully committed to nonpartisan nature while educating the public on candidates, as well as promoting reliable and secure elections for our country. For more than 100 years, we've studied issues, take positions, and we take action. So thank you for all of your support. And if you aren't a member, we welcome you and invite you to become a member at our local, state, or national level. You can find us on the web. We are on lots of different websites and on YouTube as well. And then we also would like to thank the Roseville Area League and the White Bear Lake Area League for their continued support of our programs and for sharing those as well. So thank you all so much. We appreciate your time and expertise, and I will post a lot of these links on YouTube. So thank you, all the resources that you shared and things like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.